What up? Welcome to Homegrown Hustle, where local brilliance takes the center stage. I'm your host, Matt Eichmann. Together, we're about to embark on an inspiring journey. Our community thrives on the wisdom of insightful leaders that are right here in our backyard. And we're bringing their expertise to your ears. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or simply seeking inspiration, this podcast is your guide. Join us every week in celebrating innovation, guidance, and the power to inspire greatness. Let's explore the stories that shape our local business landscape, and together, let's ignite the spark of excellence.
What's up, hustlers? We're here with a special podcast. We've got three of the Minnesota cannabis industry's best here in the studio. I'm super excited for this. We've had Matt Robidou on once before. I've got one of my good friends, Nady, from years back, and a new friend that I know through a neighbor. And it's funny how all these roads merge. So rather than me trying to introduce everybody, I'm going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves, tell you about their business and what they do and how they got into the industry. So, Matt, you want to kick it off?
Sure. My name is Matt Robidou. I got into cannabis right after I got out of the Marine Corps. I had an interesting upbringing. Didn't really have much to say about cannabis as I grew up. I didn't really have any sort of experience with it at all. Just really the dare experience, and kind of being skewed in that sense to be against it actually in the beginning. But I tried it when I turned 18. I kind of held off on all drugs and alcohol, thinking I was knowing I was going into the military. So I ended up trying alcohol first, and then within a couple months I tried cannabis. Completely changed my perspective, and I never forgot about it that entire 5 years that I was in the Marine Corps. When I got out, I immediately started using again, and it was just the substance that was working the best for me to kind of regain what I felt was a sense of normality in my life, and everything else that I was given in terms of prescribed drugs was just making me a less version of myself. And so I spent the last 6 years working on developing a healthy and strong relationship with cannabis. And I knew that I really wanted to kind of create a business when I got out of the Marine Corps, and started off with cultivation, and has now shifted through a beautiful random unfolding of events where our state, allowed for these low-dose hemp edibles. And so I saw there was a need for science-backed products that really were looking at the bleeding edge of where humanity was going in terms of how we interface with these low-dose products. And so I launched my brand, Raiden Labs, named after my son, Raiden, who I had unfortunately lost in 2021 due to hospital negligence. And so my goal since then has really been to make a difference in the space and really educate people on how to properly use cannabis to kind of get into the best version of themselves.
Powerful story. You're currently going to school at the U studying. You want to talk about what you're studying currently?
Yeah, so right now I'm at the University of Minnesota. I'm a senior. I'm about to graduate my undergrad, and so I've been really just exclusively working on cannabis my entire 4 years. The first 2.5 years of that was me doing it under the radar because it was not even acceptable to work on cannabis at all at the U. And the U of M is a federal land-grant institute, and so very much the federal government is very much like Big Brother to the U of M. And so any sort of like cannabis related conversations were promptly shut down. So yeah, I kind of reframed it under the guise of hemp. And fortunately, hemp and marijuana are the same plant physiologically. The only difference is the gene that controls the THC CBD ratios. And so I was able to essentially frame it as, hey, let's look at the physiology of this plant. It doesn't matter whether it produces THC or CBD. It doesn't, it's the same research that's applicable to all. And so that was kind of my in. And now I'm doing the first U of M's first physiology study with light and cannabis, looking at how light intensity affects root growth and chlorosis in cannabis cuttings. And so that's kind of just it's a very straightforward initial study, and that's just kind of opening the door as a proof of concept for my PhD, which would be I'm really looking right now at trichome morphogenesis, what that means is essentially how are trichomes created between genetic and environmental factors, like, you know, looking into how each component, wind, temperature, rain, all these different factors, how they influence trichome development, which ultimately can increase yields in commercial systems. And so that's kind of where my focus is right now over the next 5 years. And then, you know, obviously bouncing between the business side and the university, which that's another area that I've really kind of recognized as there's a huge gap and no bridge between the two.
Well, that's what we're trying to do here today, is start building the bridge. So
exactly.
Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate you coming out here. Nadie, you want to introduce yourself and your business?
I mean, do I have to go next? Because that's a tough act to follow.
It really is. I should have
Matt, are you hiring? My name's Nate Milstein. Matthew just referred to me as Nadie, which is indication that he's known me for a while and through the closest of homies. I've been a lover of cannabis for, unfortunately, too long, where my brain was still in a state of undevelopedness, and it still is. But yeah, I loved smoking weed, and I think that my journey into cannabis as a business person began when I got hit by a car in 2013 while riding my bike. I ruptured a disc in my spine, my cervical spine. And I was I was prescribed Vicodin and Valium that day to be taken simultaneously. And like, as a young, reckless, like recreational drug user, even I was kind of skeptical about, like, are you sure you want me to take Vicodin and Valium at the same time? And doctor's like, yeah, what's the problem? So did it once and woke up speaking gibberish on the couch to my roommate when he came home from work, and I had no recollection of it until he told me about it the next morning, and so I was like, not going to take that combination again, and immediately went back to the doctor to try to find something that was less invasive. So I would still put on prescription medications like Flexeril and Tramadol, and I was doing physical therapy, but even those medications made it really difficult for me to operate on like a daily basis. And all I really wanted was to get my life back. So that involved finding something that was non-invasive enough where I could mitigate enough pain to do the physical therapy and regain, like, you know, my physical health. And I found cannabis was really helpful. Just, I don't know how much, as far as like THC and direct pain relief it provides. I think for me, at least, it's more of distraction where I can focus on like being stoned, or even like lock into my music better if I'm going for a run or working out or whatever. And so that was my new strategy, was to get stoned before physical therapy and working out. And eventually
It's like the opposite of what people think.
Yeah. And there are so many facets of cannabis, you know, whether it's hemp or, you know, marijuana, for lack of a better distinguishing term. Like, I'm a vegan. I feel like it's been too long. We're too far into the podcast, and I haven't mentioned it yet, so I had to drop that. I have to really focus on getting complete proteins and omega fatty acids that are essential for human life. And like, as a stoner who is using the like cannabis to improve my quality of life, to also have, from like just a nutritional level, the hemp seed that has essentially like nature's perfect ratio of omega fatty acids, and one of the only plant-based sources of complete protein. It's just kind of wild that this plant was ever, vilified, because it's such a holistically beneficial plant. It's almost like an indication of intelligent design, where, either there's intelligent design, and I'm not a religious person, but it kind of like, it's too perfect for it not to, but like, if it's not, then it's just almost like a coevolution where humans and cannabis have been working together for so long that it's just like, this is the key to so many.
Yeah, it solves a lot of problems.
Exactly. So, I've always been very pro cannabis, but even in my own healing, and not to say that I only ever used it for healing, because originally I didn't use it for much other than like making music sound better, and America's Funniest Home Videos funnier and all that. But for me, I am not a great like functional stoner. I can't wake up in the morning and smoke weed and then actually get all my work done. So as soon as I found out that CBD was a thing that could provide a lot of the anti-inflammatory and pain relief benefits, I was super interested. And I tried it out when I went out to Oregon back in 2015 in the form of a high CBD, low THC strain. I think it was Critical Mass. And being able to receive a lot of the benefits that I was seeking from cannabis, from something that wasn't as intoxicating, was like amazing. And so that's how I went down my own path of CBD use. And then I had a friend who was cat sitting our cats at the time, and we were out of town. And she gave us a call and said that we were going to have to find another cat sitter because she had just experienced her first grand mal seizure. And, her health was our primary concern. Finding another cat sitter was secondary. So I was like, are you okay? Like, what can we do to help? And she kind of described the feeling before she had her first grand mal seizure as being in a constant dreamlike state or experiencing deja vu constantly. And when she was brought to the hospital, they hooked her up to the CT scan after putting her on anticonvulsant medications, and she was experiencing that same sensation. And turns out she's having like these partial seizures that just aren't sending her into full convulsions. And so she was representative of a group of people who have a seizure disorder but aren't responding well to traditional forms of medication. And I had been seeing Facebook videos of people who are treating seizure disorders with CBD. So I offered her some of my stash that I had just always had on hand. And she said it was like the curtain lifted and like the fog just dissipated and it gave her life back. So I went and looked for some locally available options, and I know Plus CBD was one of the first manufacturers that made it onto the shelves of like the co-ops locally. And there was a 300 milligram applicator for $65, and that was the lowest cost per milligram that I could find in a store locally. So I got it for her, and it worked well. So it wasn't only like the marijuana derived forms of CBD that were working for her. This hemp derived option was a viable option, but for her, who, she just lost her ability to drive and work, and paying, 100 milligrams a day, I think was like the minimum dosage that they recommended, and paying $20 a day out of pocket for something when you're not working is just not like an option. So I began my journey becoming like a manufacturer of products by just identifying a need for more accessible products in Minnesota. And I intentionally kind of pigeonholed ourselves to operating in the state of Minnesota. So our mission was to create greater accessibility for Minnesotans in particular to products that are non-intoxicating, but you can find a lot of these benefits from. and that's where it all came from. And, you know, we've been in business as the entity as we exist as now since 2018. So we've been in it for a while, and there's been evolutions as the demand and market changes. But we, I think, have sort of achieved our goals by initially creating market pressures on people where they had to compete with our pricing. And our pricing was intended to be as fair as possible. So we even had like restrictions on retailers that we would make them sign, guaranteeing that they wouldn't sell our product for more than, it was like $25 for a 600 milligram product. And that was like the beginning, but now just the pressure that pricing put on the market kind of achieved our goal externally.
Made it more available.
And, you know, even in the beginning, like, I put a video of how our products were manufactured on our website so that anybody who was interested in creating their own products could just use that as a guide. And the whole thing was like, we don't want to hide behind patented proprietary formulas and pretend like only our product is going to work for people. We like to let the plant do the heavy lifting, because for so long, cannabis has benefited humans. And it hasn't been because it's micro-encapsulated, and it hasn't been because, you know, we're finding the right dosage on some random study bell curve where you need to have exactly 5 milligrams. And if you go over it, you're going to create a tolerance. And if you go under it, it's not going to do anything. Like, we made the product accessible, and then we let the plant do the heavy lifting, and we found success like that.
That's awesome. What a awesome story. I think you did a good job following Matt there, but Margie is probably going to do better than both of you.
Yeah, no easy task.
I don't know.
So let's hear about your story. You got a really unique product line, I think just launched recently, but you've worked in the cannabis industry for a little bit now. So you want to tell everybody your story and kind of how you got to where you're at right now?
Yeah. So I'm Margi, and I'm the founder and CEO of Veek. And we are women's, well, where do I look, actually? This is weird.
You just look wherever you
want. Look at me, Margi.
Yeah. Whatever feels right.
Okay.
Or just stare at the wall.
I'll just stare at the wall. So we are, we're a women's wellness brand, and we create powerful botanical products to empower your evolution. This was all inspired by perimenopause and menopause, but as we were talking earlier, the brand goes way beyond that. It's products that help with post-menopause and menstruation, postpartum, all of that stuff. So I guess a little bit about my story as far as cannabis use, that I guess, I don't know, is my mom going to listen to this?
Maybe.
Are you going to talk about crawling on the ground outside of your...
You can talk about
we could.
whatever
Actually, that is part
want.
of how we formulated our gummies, to be honest. That's inspired by that. So I dabbled in cannabis use in high school and definitely in college. Always enjoyed it, but did have a couple of instances where I experienced extreme anxiety, kind of paranoia, didn't know how to dose it correctly for my body, and, you know, ultimately figured that out the hard way, kind of through trial and error. And I have 4 kids, and the last 2 are twins, and I had a traumatic birth with my twins in 2016, which then kind of kicked off a myriad of health issues, like inflammatory health problems, and also anxiety and apparently depression. You know, that was all like diagnosed by a little survey you take at the doctor. So it was like, I've never been depressed or anxious before. Is this real? Like, why are they so quick to kind of put me on antidepressants? I feel like there's more going on here. That all started to kind of bubble up for me in that time period as well. And in 2019, a friend of mine introduced me to full spectrum CBD oil to take as something to help mitigate and kind of calm down at least the feeling of anxiety. and I was like totally hooked. So I definitely dove head into the world of CBD oils and really found them to be helpful and calming with not only just the health stuff that was going on, but just day-to-day life, you know, the chaos of having 4 kids and 2 dogs and a high stress job and all that stuff. And so COVID hit, and like a lot of people, I leaned on my love for wine and spirits and dirty martinis to kind of survive, really, I guess, for survival. And came to the point where I realized I was drinking way too much. At the same time, I was experiencing like big hormonal fluctuations, or at least what I thought by my own research were hormonal fluctuations. Went to my doctor. And by this point, by the time I brought it up with her, I was about 36, and just said, listen, I think I might be in perimenopause. And her response was basically, yeah, you might be. There's some symptoms that you're talking about that register. We're not going to really look into it, though, because your hormones are fluctuating anyway. Let's up your antidepressant, and we'll put you on birth control. And I didn't really
throw this stuff at you.
So I was like, I don't really understand like what the point of that is. She's like, well, if you're going through perimenopause, you're most likely low on progesterone. So they gave me an IUD, which is goes up into your body and has localized hormone. By the way, we'll all become really close friends here by the end, because I talk a lot about all things. And so the progesterone in that IUD was supposed to help me feel better. Instead, I bled for 6 months straight.
And that wasn't good?
That seems like it's not a good thing, Nate.
No.
I feel like that's bad.
Like, it's not good.
Well, bloodletting was a thing.
It's not how they drew it up.
Bloodletting wasn't ineffective.
It wasn't effective.
It was not effective.
It was a bad thing.
Yeah.
Just point of clarification.
So, and at which point I had labs done and found that my ferritin levels were at a 7, which basically means that I was not getting the protein that's supposed to carry the oxygen through your blood, or whatever what that translates to, was not working. So the feeling of not being able to get out of bed every single morning was caused, primarily, it was coming at me from all angles. It was the hormonal fluctuations. It was the actual loss of blood. I was incapacitated, basically. And so to cope and basically to satisfy, the need for dopamine, serotonin, all of those things to be able to function and not scream at everyone, because I was a bleeding animal, like true panic. So I don't know how else to explain it. I was drinking to help balance that out. That's that immediate dopamine rush. And then as I kind of stepped back and looked around, everyone else was too. All of my friends were neighborhood girls. We would sit and talk about what we speculated was perimenopause over 4 bottles of wine. So there was this survival, this vibe of just nobody's listening to us. This is another period of our lives similar to childbirth and postpartum. When I started having kids in 2008, and that was right when Jessica Alba launched Honest Company. And I remember there were no, Facebook had just launched a couple of years before that. I don't know, truly a couple. And so there were no mom communities, Mommy and Me camps, and social, which is all great. I'm sounding sarcastic, but it is great that there's a real community around pregnancy and postpartum now. But what it felt like when I entered perimenopause was kind of this flashback to pregnancy and postpartum with my first, which was okay, cool. This is one of those figure it out moments. I'll just have to take people's tips and tricks and see what works, because it turns out that almost bleeding to death and, antidepressants wasn't helping me. That doesn't mean that it doesn't help other people. I am not an OB, and there are things that help people, but it didn't help me. So realizing that the drinking was then actually becoming a problem. So when I had that traumatic birth experience with my twins, I went into liver failure, and your liver heals itself. But I basically at that same time had a doctor say, like, you have to stop drinking because your liver's not going to give you like warning when it decides to crap out again. Like those were actual words. No, they weren't. But I was like, I took that to heart. And I tried to negotiate, like, could I just have one drink? Yeah. He's like, yeah, I mean, I'd think of the faces of your 4 children first. And I was like, cool.
Savage. That doctor's.
Yeah, he did not hold punches. But it didn't. So I really took a good look at that, at my habits and rituals, and realized that I needed to cut down. I was at the same time working in the liquor industry. I had been in it for 13 years.
Doesn't make it easy.
And specifically in craft spirits. I love whiskey. I love a good cocktail. And it was really hard for me to find that balance. So fast forward 20, what is it? What year is it right now?
25.
Brain fog is a symptom of perimenopause. Do we talk about symptoms? Anyway, fast forward. I left the liquor industry and started doing consulting work, worked for a couple cannabis companies, and realized that there was a real gap in marketing to the women who were actually turning to these products for not just relief from alcohol, but also relief from the symptoms of perimenopause. So I started looking into studies and seeing like insane numbers around usage from women 35 to 55 in recreational cannabis, and looked for the brands that were speaking to them and matching, symptom with relief, and wasn't seeing it out there. So this opportunity to collaborate with a farm here in Otsego, Minnesota, and some growers, and really like put pen to paper and create a brand to help women. It was like perfect alignment of the stars.
And that just launched now?
Yeah, we just launched. We just launched 3 weeks ago. And the response has been great. I think our topicals are incredible. We use the whole flower. We do the harvesting, the decarbing. We make the all MCT macerations and all of the other botanical blends as well that go into the product. And then our gummies are pretty freaking fantastic. So they're all microdose. They all include one additional cannabinoid, and then they all have other functional ingredients like L-theanine, ashwagandha, passion flower, valerian for our sleep gummy, tart cherry.
Gummies seem to kind of be the thing that people are more willing to try than like smoking herb or something like that. But as I'm hearing all of you talk about your stories, all very different, but there's a gap that you all kind of experience one way or the other. And then through kind of like self-medicating or helping other people medicate, you saw opportunity. And from that's where there's products that are being created, and that's happening so much. But there's barriers that we're running into, right, because of a lot of reasons, right? So that knowledge gap, you're trying to bridge it for a really specific niche. You're trying to bridge the gap for just the understanding of cannabis in general and how that functions, and you just want everybody to have it, which I freaking love. So like when it comes to the problems that you're running into right now with your business, like what are those, maybe we can call them opportunities, but the things that people are talking about, and it's just something in the way of a cannabis entrepreneur here in Minnesota? Because it's been going on for years now, this whole conversation about being legal and all that.
I can go first so I don't have to follow Matt again. I think from the very beginning, because we were operating in a legal gray area, navigating regulations and what we were and weren't allowed to produce and how we were allowed to produce it has always been a challenge, and one that not only is evolving, but is also just like so full of ambiguity.
Is that with intent, do you think? That it's ambiguous? Or
yeah, I mean, it's clear as mud. It's so impossible. Like, there's no playbook, so it's, to me, it feels intentional. I'm sure it's not. Maybe I'm just not smart. But I
think you might just be paranoid. It always feels intentional when you're paranoid.
Well, it's not. It just feels like it's intentional. Like, you take a step forward. Oh, well, you can't do that. Clearly, you knew that you can't do that.
Who's even in charge?
I didn't know that.
So I think that is there are so many factors, and in some ways it is intentional. And, you know, even like the Nixon administration admitted that cannabis criminalization was a tool of repression that they used. So it's not like that was, it was an open secret. And the people who always fought against legalization were the people who benefited from cannabis being legal. So like police unions would fight against it because they got to do a bunch of civil seizures of people that were not violent. Because if you're going to want to raid a house, you'd rather raid somebody who's stoned than who's high as fuck on meth.
Yeah. It happened, so let's just roll with it, man.
So yeah, like I think that there is a combination of intentionality and just inefficiency or disorganization.
Is it almost like a domino effect or a house of cards? Like there's so many things that happen, they're trying to solve for them, and like maybe some of them aren't actually problems, that like it's just taking so much time, and there's all this innovation and new ideas that's building, but there's really not a lot of outlet and places where it can continue to move forward and allow that creativity to continue to expand. It's like a lot of limitation on the opportunity that's there. And it's still a big opportunity. Like the market's getting bigger and bigger every day. And the question is for everybody, well, what's actually going to happen? Like who's going to be allowed to run a business?
Yeah. I think at least the approach that has worked for us is a combination of a natural high tolerance for risk paired with like a really good faith effort to follow the rules, or at least the spirit of the rules, and produce products in a way that is putting public health at the forefront. So I always felt confident moving forward with business decisions in legal gray areas when I was doing everything that I could to make sure that the integrity of my products was maintained. So sourcing of ingredients, like good manufacturing practices, like all of the stuff that happens behind the scenes that I really don't think is always the case. Like, you know, we could have participated in the whole Delta 8 movement, but I never felt comfortable making a profit when I knew that I was going to be using my customers who trust me to put out a good product as guinea pigs, essentially. So until I was 100% sure that there was like research backing the safety and efficacy of a product, I wouldn't participate in the manufacturing or sales of it.
Matt, do you think, is there like a particular piece of information or like science from a research standpoint that is missing that could better inform the decision makers about cannabis, and as they're in that kind of holding pattern, it feels like?
I mean, I think the biggest issue right now is on the balance between ethical businesses and non-ethical businesses. I think that's the big thing. It's just like what happened with CBD in the beginning, where you had all, you know, early CBD companies. There was a lot of them. I know that, you know, Nate, there's a ton of CBD companies that were putting out cut products that were not true dosed. They were basically cutting them, which then betrayed people because they were trying this and they didn't notice anything. And so in terms of now, you're having more on the flip side, like with the Delta 8. Delta 8 itself, from a science perspective, isn't necessarily bad on its own, but it's how it's produced, and all these people, like, that's the idea, is that you have basically no regulation. Like, we're basically having to regulate ourselves within reason. Even with the hemp processing side of things, early on, that was all based on like, you should follow these procedures, but there was no one that's going in and actually maintaining the procedures that would be in any industry, including like if you were to make like even just something simple as like flour, like they're gonna test their flour, as in like flour, like baking flour, right? Like something simple where you're just spray drying, you know, ground up powder and putting it in bags. Like, why do they have higher regulations than we do in that sense? And so it was really on us to self-regulate. And, you know, our industry could have went two directions, and we could have betrayed there could have been a majority of businesses that are betraying trust, and then you have this unraveling. But on the flip side, you see people that are focused on ethics, focused on, okay, we know that this is high risk. So I think anybody in this space has to have a high tolerance for risk, but you're focused on doing the right things for your customers to build that trust.
Passion.
Yes, because we care about it, and that's the thing. And there's people that, once again, if you look at a brand and if you ask, I guess especially from a retailer perspective, if you're a retailer or a store owner and you look at a brand and you're like, I don't even know who owns this company. The products are just there, like they're just sitting there. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that are more of like, okay, what are their true intentions? Is it just purely money focused? And there's, it's a cash grab where they know they're going out of business at some point. You know what I mean? Or maybe they're delusional and they don't. I don't know. But it's this idea of that they're focused on the wrong thing. And most businesses that I've seen here that are still on the shelves are the ones that are focused on proper ethics, that are focused on taking care of their customers, that are focused on kind of doing what we can because we know that they support us. And in this space, I don't know, I think we have a big shift coming up, obviously, with the legalization and all this transfer to OCM. And we're starting to get regulations. And there's this, this concern right now that I think the biggest concern that I'm aware of in the space is there may be a period of time where people like myself won't be able to sell my product because I need a new license that doesn't exist yet. So there's this weird gray area.
So they're like taking it away a little bit.
But that's where I guess for me, I've had to come to the conclusion of like our industry, the hemp industry across the country right now is larger than the marijuana industry. It's become larger. And together they're encroaching on, or maybe even have already passed $60 billion. So
massive.
It's huge. And when I look at other states that are not legalized yet or don't even have like a hemp market, and even if they do have a hemp market, their markets are very immature. So there's so much more like growth in that space that I just can't see. I think at this point it's very risk. Like I said, it's you have to have that risk tolerance because of the uncertainty. But I just don't see any way that we could, really have this industry space shut down with how much, the passion and the businesses that are really pushing the needle forward are the ones that are ethically sound. And so,
well, and they've got to be making money too, otherwise they're not going to stay
revenue.
in business, right?
Yeah.
So
I think, like, just to piggyback off of what Matt just said, there is a huge lack of awareness in for consumers on the practices that hemp companies sometimes employ. And there is a function of legalizing hemp, and the spirit of hemp legalization was never to create intoxicating cannabinoids off of that. But because there was a loophole that was created and now is able to be exploited, there has been a huge, I could go very far back and talk about how the commodification of CBD and how there's just a huge oversupply and then a need to find a use for all of this CBD that was just sitting on shelves. But people started converting that CBD into Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, THCP, THCV, all of these analogs that we're hearing of. And the way that they do it sometimes is using novel acids that aren't really used for many other things, and heavy metals to catalyze reactions. And those heavy metals can be copper or nickel or aluminum. And the issue with that is not only that we don't it's not a natural process of creating these cannabinoids. So somebody can be taking a Delta 9 gummy and not realize that it was created not the same way that you get it from a cannabis plant, which is, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of anybody reasonable, a totally arbitrarily criminalized plant in the first place. But since we have created this need to circumvent the laws, we're now creating this need to create products through this new process. And when you're testing cannabis for heavy metals, you're testing for things that the plant would absorb from the soil naturally. So that would be four heavy metals. It's lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. And so when you're using heavy metals in your process to catalyze these reactions, that can remain in the product and you can still test it and have a clean cannabis test result. And I think that is a fact that a lot of people don't understand when they're purchasing products on the shelves. And it's up to us as savvy, insiders, producers, to be aware of the dangers that could be associated with consuming these neurotoxic heavy metals. And then, I always had like a strong urge to use my platform to discuss who I thought might be like bad actors in the industry and people that were promoting Delta 8 flower, which doesn't exist. Like, you need to take a CBD.
There's no science behind any of it, and pretty much the space right now, you can throw anything out there, and if it's marketed well enough and you get it in front of enough people, you
people
can sell
just buy it.
Right. And just like with like K2 previously, where we were using these totally like synthetic cannabinoids that don't exist in nature. It's the same thing where you spray it on a plant and people assume that it's organic, but it's so far from it. And then promoting it in a way, because you're not supposed to be selling intoxicating cannabinoids, or at least like prior to 2022 in Minnesota, but like promoting it in a way that it sounds like it's natural and it sounds like it's not going to get you high. And I'm sitting here like wanting so bad to call these people out, but knowing that they're so powerful that it would just put a target on my back as somebody who's not willing to participate in these, business practices that could make me a ton of money and make me a very powerful company. But it would be at the detriment of literally the whole entire mission that I got into cannabis in the first place for. So like, if I'm trying to alleviate the suffering of my neighbors,
you want to have a pure product.
I don't want to sell something to somebody where, they don't think they're going to get high from it and they consume it and they have a panic attack on the highway and they crash their car, like whatever it is.
That would be me. I would be that person.
And I'm so glad that I didn't sell it to you, Margi, because you're here today.
So I know you're you're from farm to finished product all the way. Do both of you source is that source and knowing that it's clean, is that integral to all your businesses?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of businesses in Minnesota that are like that, and everyone else is going to do whatever they're going to do, right? But regardless, there's that knowledge gap, right? And it's being filled with somebody's information, whether or not it's right or wrong. So, like, what are some things that a consumer should know, or misconceptions that are interrupting their introduction into using cannabis as medicine?
I mean, I think on the broader side, there's a lot of marketing terms that don't mean anything.
Because you can't really say a lot about it, right?
Well, even if you think of other products that you buy from the store, like let's talk about wine, for instance, and a lot of these same terms are used in the cannabis world, like, sustainably made or sustainably sourced. That could just mean that they use, a solar panel on their roof, or that they don't use as much water as they need to. Like, it's not a real definition of anything, but people really respond to that from a buying side. The farm that we grow, where we grow, and which is owned by part of our team, so it's our farm, for a long time was registered, certified organic. And we all had a meeting and said, are we going to go to market with a certified organic product, or do we know that because the way we grow and the practices that we use, that it's actually, the process of certifying organic is a very long, painful, ongoing process.
Yeah. It's not worth it nowadays.
It's not worth it.
Most farmers will tell you it's not worth it nowadays.
I agree. And the thing is that it's not going to change the way we make our product. It's not going to change the way we grow. We're still basically growing organically. We are growing organically. We're just not getting the certification. So in the wine world, again, like it's just an easy comparison because it's been around forever, but people buy things because they're certified biodynamic. Well, any bottle of French wine that you buy off the shelf is certified biodynamic because that's the way, it's a practice that they developed.
It sounds made up.
But they don't put it on their bottle. Yeah, it's not, all of it's made, but you know what I'm saying? It is a real practice, just like organic farming is. And so, I mean, that if people are set on only consuming organic certified, that's definitely a choice and that's respected. But it doesn't mean that the product isn't being grown organically. And then on the flip side of that, you could have someone who's marketing their product as environmentally friendly and sustainably grown, and it's like, to Nate's point, the furthest thing from it because of the way they actually process their flower, because of the other ingredients that they're using.
For example, so I grew my plants with just water, but I had researched and done soil tests to find basically the nutrients were already in the soil. So it's, you have to know cannabis uses this. We need this profile. We need these amounts. Find that patch, plant there. And then now you have everything you need. Water is the catalyst for all reactions and absorption. So you provide, the plant with all that. But I didn't go through that process because it would have cost me more money and been a pain in the butt. And I already had, all these other things to do. And it just didn't seem worth it. And it's kind of one of those things where how do you get that across? And then the fact that you have the vast majority, and I would even say, I feel like 80+% at least of your average customer that goes into a store is going to fall victim to those products or being misled in that way by somebody
because of the marketing
point.
terms.
Because of the terms, or if, for example, another one that really gets me as a scientist is indica sativa. That doesn't exist anymore. It used to, and it used to make sense. Because you had trends that would follow. So, for example, you would have thin-leafed sativa from Thailand that some guy went over and brought back in 1978 from his trip to Thailand before, when you could easily just bring seeds in all the time. And then he would grow that and disseminate it through his friends, and it would end up, within 5 years, it would be across the whole Midwest, and then you'd have this true sativa, which would then correlate to these higher THC, lower CBD levels, which would make you feel more of this like head rush feeling. And then you'd have this same situation, but some guy went to Afghanistan or Pakistan and went to the Hindu Kush, brought back a seed. That seed has high CBD levels. Now you get people passing it around. Now you have these very distinct effects that people do because they're not crossbred, but now all those seeds from 1978 are still here. They're being grown still in the marketplace, but they've been crossbred by people over and over and over again. And everything's been blended up together. And so now you have a very unique marketplace where what I would describe as indica in terms of its taxonomy, what it looks like, is now having effects that are more of that indica style. And then vice versa. You have indica plants that are labeled as indica as a subcultivar. You have cannabis sativa, indica, cannabis sativa, cannabis sativa ruderalis. Now you have this kind of crossed over effect. So now everybody's confused, but people will slap that on a hemp cultivar that's that they don't even really know what it is. They just slap it on there as in, like if you said, okay, I'm going to do a test and we're going to see if they'd be like, no, please don't, it's not going to come out the way that I want it to. And that's the point is why we're kind of with my idea of like what the future of, it's not even hemp drive, right? Hemp, marijuana, it's cannabis. They're the same thing. So, as we just distinguished earlier, for lack of a better term, marijuana, all those are political terms. They don't exist in the plant side of things because they don't make sense. And so, as we're going forward with the future of where cannabis is kind of positioning itself, I think you see the low dose side, which is more focused on function. And then you have the high dose side, which is focused on more recreation and medical use. And in between there, you have people that fluctuate between the two. You have some people who, like myself, where I'll take a low dose in the morning on some days, especially if I'm doing like tasks like yard work or even just around the plants where I'm not because cannabis is not THC, sorry, not cannabis. THC specifically in high doses is not good for linear thinking. Linear thinking is a lot of college. So for linear thinking, as you mentioned earlier, I can't use it in the morning. That's what you said, Nate. And the reason for that is because you have certain tasks. Some parts of our brain work in this way of like, jump from point A to point B to point C to point D. Other points are point A to point C to point B to, and you jump around a little bit. That's music or art or anything creative. And so it's kind of that idea of the more you understand cannabis, the more that you can kind of put reins on it. You can put a saddle on it. You can start to actually use it for an intentional use other than just this, what alcohol is typically used for.
And it's not one size fits all.
It is not.
That's
literally different for everybody.
Right. And it has to do with your
100%.
own system, your own endocannabinoid system. And then with women, it's interesting, like one of the symptoms of perimenopause is anxiety and like already, right? So if your baseline, because of hormonal fluctuations, is like this, like barely holding on kind of mindset, taking a high dose and that's again like kind of an arbitrary term to the consumer, right? Like the high dose, low dose. 5 milligrams for me is on any given day can send me into full blown like panic.
It can be like bad, right?
Bad.
It creates
Last night,
when
I had a bad experience.
So you touched on something, the endocannabinoid
Not with my
system.
gummies, but
So endocannabinoid system, that's kind of internally why, like it's the why the plant works inside of us, right? But a lot of people don't even know what the endocannabinoid system is. Matt, you want to drop some knowledge on us?
Yeah. So endocannabinoid system is basically our body's tool for homeostasis. So it controls all of our regulatory functions, temperature, hunger, our mood, even influences sleep. And so you have this very important system that is actually not, I believe I have a couple of friends who are going through med school, or I've just finished med school, and I asked all of them, I said, how much did you guys talk about the ECS? We spent 2 days out of this 2-year period, 2 days on the endocannabinoid system, and that's it. And so
that's
it's
more than they
very
learn about
understudied.
menopause. And
Yes, well, right, and it's it's an understudied thing, and there's obviously many of those. But anyways, ECS, really going back to it, is throughout your body you have 2 main primary receptor types: CB1, CB2. CB1 is more of on your neurological like system, so nervous system throughout your body, primarily dense in your brain and your spinal cord. CB2 is more on your peripheral nervous system. So actually a lot of the receptors are present on your immune cells, which that's where that kind of inflammation and how it kind of really regulates in different areas. And so, THC being essentially an activator of this receptor binds to it, primarily CB1 for the psychoactive effects, and essentially will kind of stimulate it to release dopamine across this synapse. CBD will bind to the side, or it technically doesn't bind, but it basically changes the shape of the receptor. So essentially changes that kind of key shape where the THC molecules can't impact it. Now, the cool part about the ECS is that we make our own cannabinoids. So humans make cannabinoids.
Endogenous.
Yes, endogenous. So we make our endocannabinoids, which factor in the endocannabinoid system. And the primary one that we're interested in the cannabis space is called anandamide. 2-AG is another one, but anandamide is the main kind of focus.
Isn't a runner's high like a version of that?
Yeah. So our bodies really, when we work, and it does, and the runner's high is kind of, even like construction workers, when you see them and they're out there all day, how do they keep going? It's anandamide. Why do they enjoy their work? It's anandamide. As we get into our bodies, the anandamide starts to flow, and we start to feel good about it. This goes back. You could say this goes back to the origination of like the human brain and how our evolution happened in terms of how do we motivate ourselves to do these tasks? How do we motivate ourselves to go on hunts for 12 miles that take all day long? How do we do all that? It's through these systems that are just simply biological that previous humans didn't understand. And so nowadays we've have the luxury to be able to understand that and actually start to kind of use cannabis to kind of tap into it and say, okay, how do we control it? In 1960s, 70s, when cannabis became a worldwide phenomenon, it was essentially being abused back then because nobody knew anything. They didn't know how to use it properly. They didn't know how it was impacting our bodies. They didn't know anything. And over time, you see people, a new space, which is what we're in now, in this low dose THC, higher dosed minor cannabinoid space, is really focused on, okay, how do we put reins on this effect? How do we, instead of just going from 0 to 100, let's dial it to some sort of a results driven. And, there's like I said, the medical side, which is day to day, people can, we take ibuprofen and all these other things all the time to kind of just keep us up at a certain level. And I truly believe that cannabis, as we continue to study it, can be utilized in that fashion as well. It just is going to require, once again, a lot of studies and proof that, and trust that we know, even going back to the women's issues in medicine. Once again, I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm focused on the plant science, and the chemistry is very much crossed over. Most of the time in medicine, doctors will prescribe treatments based on pros and cons. So, if the pros outweigh the cons, then it's justifiable. Those cons, that list of cons, the pros are very evident because people consume it and then they have they affect. But the cons are what's difficult to put our fingers on, especially when each person is so different. Because not only are the treatments not the same, where you can't say, like, I can't tell everybody my gummy ratio works that way. I didn't make it around me. I made it around how the molecules work in themselves. But the prescription treatments, those are different, but also the cons are different. There's people that suffer more or have higher sensitivity in their endocannabinoid system. My wife, for example, she can't even take more than 2 milligrams or she gets completely just like out of it. And that's because her receptor density is so high. You could argue that you could probably break through that, as in reduce the amount of density by taking consistently higher doses, but you don't want to do that necessarily. The goal of really a sustainable cannabis user is to maintain that receptor density. That's where tolerance comes from. If you go too far and use, too high of a dose for 2 to 3 weeks consistently, you're going to constantly, or even less time than I would say, but you're going to reduce your receptor density to a point where you need more cannabis to have that same effect. Versus these people that are highly sensitive, seemingly like you, Margi, where 5 milligrams to the average person that tries it for the first time is at the upper threshold, but that clearly wasn't your first time, and so you are much more likely to be on that more sensitive side versus some people where they can take a bong hit the first time they ever smoke and they're like, hell yeah, let's go. I'm sure you weren't that person necessarily.
Well, I have a story about that for another day.
But not everybody is entering into using cannabis now through that way.
Yes, exactly. And that's
what's really unique, right? Mm-hmm. But the thought process that the people who haven't experienced it are having is still one that's kind of ancient at this point, because because it's moved so far forward. So there's this consumer type that I see from the outside looking in, people who are just down with it and they're going to use it in whatever form, and they're glad it's more readily available. And then there's the people that maybe want to, but there's some type of dogma or preconceived notion that's getting in the way, or fear, whatever it is, from utilizing a THC or a cannabis product. So is it worth focusing on deepening education there? Is that really the big focus here, or is the market share just going to be people who are already using it, or people who drink alcohol and now they're...
I think it's all about education.
I disagree.
Okay, cool. Well, that'll be fun.
Good.
You go ahead,
Disagreeing
Margi.
is fun. From my perspective, it's all about education in the sense that a lot of what you mentioned fear as the last, detail there. But I think for a lot of women, at least, fear based on bad previous experiences is a huge piece of it. So with minimal education, like just talking about dosing, because to your point, back in college, women who are going through perimenopause now are 35 to 51 years old. Their first experience with cannabis was most likely smoking a joint, an unregulated edible, a bong hit, something like that. And so if they were to have a bad experience and are afraid to try it again in the future, by education, I mean more like talking them through a good way to approach starting very small and working their way up. And I read a term, this was actually last night while I was having a bad experience. There was a term for THC, and you might know it, Matt. THC is a type of compound that has basically the same chirality. Chirality. Yeah. So it's something that can be used to, for instance, treat anxiety and can also cause anxiety. Mm-hmm. And that fine line is really understanding your system and how it responds to it. So that is an education moment as far as I'm concerned, that like my neighbor next door who said, "Oh gosh, I can't do THC." I was like, "Well, maybe let's Have you ever tried it this way?" And the answer is usually no. Again, coming from my market.
Insert crazy story.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So to me, that's what I mean by education.
You said you disagree. I couldn't tell if that was just dry humor.
Let's go.
It was a little dry humor. I
I
should probably say this far into the podcast that I like to mess with Margi. Okay. We started working recently together and became fast friends. And
we never agree on anything.
No, we really don't.
Except for that.
Well, so I think that there is a lot of evidence in this conversation that supports education being important, but also like to understand cannabis as deeply as Matt does, you need to dedicate a large portion of your life to it. And the overall onus of responsibility is on people who have dedicated their lives to manufacturing and producing products and then retailing these products. Mm-hmm. So I think that education at a consumer level is important, like Margi pointed out, where it's like dosing protocols and
they just got to get a little further in their thought process besides, "Oh, I can't do that," because that is just a major barrier.
It's unlearning to a certain extent. Maybe.
Yeah,
sorry, keep going.
The uneducation.
Well, yeah, it's learning to approach cannabis in a completely different way because, I mean, Matt described this evolution of cannabis from people traveling around the world, discovering these landrace strains, and then they brought it back to the United States, and it was a long process of bastardizing their natural benefits. So we're producing these plants to, we like the terpene profiles, we like the effects, but primarily because of regulation, which is a pressure that is external and unnatural. People are just trying to find a plant that, it smells good, but it has the highest THC content because you're selling it on an illicit market, and it can grow fast, produce high yields, and fit in your closet. Mm-hmm. And those things aren't to the end of creating a product that is the most effective or the most medicinally beneficial. That's to create a economically viable product on a black market. So I think what we're doing in the last 10 years or so is kind of undoing the bastardization of cannabis, where we're exploring these other cannabinoids that aren't intoxicating. And that's doing a lot to remove the stigma. But it's going to take a coordinated effort of legalizing in a complete way where we're not partially legalizing some sort of access, but we're forcing people to produce these nasty, unnatural forms of cannabinoids. And I mean, not to touch on chirality, because
I gotta Google that after this.
It's really cool actually, because there's optical activity in chiral molecules and chemicals, and like ibuprofen is a chiral chemical, but thalidomide is a really good example of a chemical that has both a left and a right enantiomer. And I'm not going to remember which one was the one that was really good for reducing like morning sickness symptoms in pregnant women, and then the other one that was produced that was really good at creating birth defects in the children of the mothers who were taking the thalidomide. So that's another thing that like we risk with cannabis, is if we're producing it in an unnatural way, we don't have the benefit of the thousands and thousands of years of human based, testing and evidence that it is non-harmful. It's a completely different game at that point. So like,
Yeah. I like that point. I just want to add in the fact that the cannabis we're consuming today that's grown on the market and that's being bred and sold as seed is a completely different plant than what our ancestors were consuming, because they weren't necessarily breeding it for, they didn't have any of the same, the money didn't even matter back then to them, right? It was focused on, they were cultivating things to survive that enhanced their life. And really it came from the fact that early cultivars of cannabis had really strong fibers, and that was why it was grown. And the byproduct was the resin, which was kind of like the worker's gold, the reward for doing
that
the
finger
task.
hash.
Yeah, exactly. And so now, now it's become like Nate said, it's become this completely different thing that's been bred for. I remember at one point when I went to my first time going to a dispensary in California in like 2019, everything was like zero CBD, zero. It was just like zeros everything, and then just like
all the THC, yeah.
And it's like it's so strange, because that's actually like the opposite of what we're finding out now is like, and people are like, well, I want to get this, that. And it's like, you still can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You still can get any effect that you want. We don't need to isolate and just, it's the classic, like too much of anything is bad, right? Like I think that's what we're finding in this, I would say the last 5 years or so of cannabis. Like the industry is kind of, that's been the thing. I was like, okay, we're a little bit overextended on this side of things, and maybe we should kind of focus on whole plant wellness. And that's part of the reason why even my products, I use the full spectrum extract in conjunction with the THC isolate and the CBG isolate, because ultimately that you're building it into a larger pool than just two things. You don't want to ever reduce to just those two things, because it's so much more than that. There's we found that within the cannabis trichome there's over 1,000 molecules, and we don't really know what most of those do. I think we know about 20% of those are.
Pretty sure, unless something's changed, nobody's really died from weed, right?
No, and that's the thing.
So not the biggest downside for any type of personal experimentation, but yet there's so much for people I know that haven't done it or aren't utilizing it. There's so much that's in the way, but there's also like really not that much. It's just internally there's that whatever type of programming they've received that's kind of halted them where they're at, and until the government or the church or whatever it is that's getting in the way like validates it, it's still kind of this demonized plant, which brings peace and like homeostasis to millions of people all the time. So it's just,
we have women who are afraid to try our topicals.
Why do you think that is?
It's exactly what you're talking about. It's just, it's like growing up in the Nancy Reagan era of like, this is your brain on drugs with the fried egg in the pan. Like we all remember the commercial.
Yeah. So they learned the wrong
that
stuff.
And then it comes from hemp. So that must mean, and that looks like marijuana, like it's all the same. Like it's just whatever they learn.
And there's social pressures too, like the communities they're part of and everything. Like,
I think it's more like, oh, I don't touch that stuff. That's kind of more
sometimes
like,
it's, we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, people are so comfortable taking like.
We have to talk about it in order
They
for
need
anybody
an
to really
invitation
learn.
in, and that comes down to the branding and marketing too. Is like this is for you too. Like this is not, this is good stuff. But it is interesting. You mentioned like the super high, super potent. Like it's not the same stuff that that used to be out there. I think I heard like the flip side of that, of the other type of conversation that's happening out there, is because now it's opening up a little bit. I heard a podcast the other week, and it was a writer for a national publication and a physician of some sort talking about the dangers of cannabis.
Great.
And only talking about, basically all of the studies that they were pointing to were young men taking huge doses and the brain damage that, the developmental issues that can be whatever, but it was truly one side of that conversation with a major celebrity. And it was like, wow, yeah, we all really need to just because so much, it's everywhere now, and we need to be, it's like, but you're just talking about
Name and shame, Margi.
I can't name. No, I'm not going to do that because Veek's going to get a hold of her and we're going to change her mind. So,
Perfect.
but so that's also something that is misleading. You're talking about what's misleading to consumers. Again, I just can't stress enough. It's so specific to each individual, and the way to use cannabis is so specific to each individual. So like one scary study about a 22-year-old dude who did 100 milligrams of THC every day for 5 years straight is not the same as a menopausal woman who needs support with hormonal anxiety.
Context,
Yeah, it's just not the same.
I think that's a good point too, is that, cannabis is very much fragmented into all these different cases, and it's so, but it is generalized into
totally.
All these negatives are put into each person's brain, and it's almost this, like some 70-year-old woman saying, well, it affects kids' brains, and it's like, well, it's a lack of it shows a lack of understanding and a willingness at this point, or a lack of a willingness to understand themselves, to go out of their way, and which is, I guess, going back to that education aspect. It's not necessarily because you could never ask someone to reach my level, because it takes years and years of and just in school, out of school. There's everything I do is with it. Everything I do is cannabis, and so it's that idea of like what for me, it's really break it down to a level of like, at least how do you undo that lock? And for me, I've seen a lot of success in that endocannabinoid system explanation, because most people aren't even familiar with it. Or have you ever felt the runner's high before? Well, of course. Oh, okay.
That's your endocannabinoid.
And now I work back from there. And a lot of people
run.
And a lot of people come, they work backwards from that, right? So like that's the point, is like find something to kind of dig into, to like how do you resonate with them first, right? Get on the same wavelength, and then work it back. And that's what's been working for me a lot when I do, my events, and when I'm at these, where it's just, random people coming by of all backgrounds, of all receptor densities, and all their sensitivities are all different. And so it's kind of an interesting exercise to, how do you basically resonate with each person differently, because it's not the same. I'm not saying one thing to everybody.
One more thing I just want to say, as far as drawing the parallel to alcohol. So you said like some women are like, oh no, I don't know, like what is that? I think a lot of it is they see, okay, you have to be 21 years old or older to consume whatever. It's a recreational substance, and they try to create the parallel to alcohol.
Falls into this box.
So alcohol, the reason you feel drunk is because your body is trying to process a poison through your major organs. Yeah. That is objectively danger, no matter what your body
sounds bad when you say it that way. That's
it's medically a poison. I mean, that's what it is.
It is a poison, and the feeling you get is because you're processing a poison. That is not what's happening when you consume cannabis. But I think it's really hard, at least for, again, speaking just for women and my peers, like for them to wrap their head around, this is also a poison. I'm exchanging one poison for the next. It's like, no, you have the system in your body. Your body knows what to do with these ingredients. It's not the same thing. But even trying to have that conversation in passing is almost impossible to get to.
So it really comes down to like experience and willingness to experience it, because the science is like that's going to come now that we can actually study it. But there's been a couple things getting in the way of that, like really being able to expand and better inform not only the consumer, but the businesses that are creating products for the consumer. So hurry up and let these people produce products.
Serious. I mean, I think like just to get one point in, because everyone's covered things so well. I think that the stigma really, it like puts a lens on a conversation where for so long people have been talking about using cannabis in a functional way and not strictly as a recreational drug. And I think that a lot of people just assumed that those were stoners who were trying to find some justification for using drugs. And if legalization was directly correlated to the health effects of something, alcohol should be illegal way before cannabis should. You know, cigarettes should be illegal. Honestly, there's a much bigger public health consequence to having over-the-counter medications like Tylenol and Advil available, because those things are going to, if you accidentally ingest even twice the recommended dose sometimes, they're going to damage your liver. They're going to damage your kidneys. Like cannabis, I think the people who love it enough to understand it are unfortunately fighting an uphill battle against people who I think they just really like don't want to take our word for it, because they think that stoners are lazy and stupid and just trying to find these justifications for consuming these products. And, you know, I don't think you need to have as deep of an understanding as somebody who's in the market, but I do think there's like a huge responsibility on us as manufacturers to manufacture these products in a way that, even if it's not the best thing for your bottom line, are to the best of our abilities and knowledge, safe, reliable, effective, and like accurately dosed. Because if you have somebody that's consuming a way higher dose than they expected, then you're going to lose not only like a customer for life, but way more importantly, they're going to lose the opportunity to use cannabis in a way that is functional and can fit so much better in a holistic, healthy lifestyle than all of these alternatives. Like, I think California Sober is my favorite new approach to like avoiding so much more harmful substances. Like alcohol is like so bad for you. It's so bad for you.
It is tasty though. I don't want to present this picture that I'm some.
It's delicious and it's fun, but like if cannabis is illegal and alcohol is legal, our world is in a state of backwards, like just non-scientific.
The world's going to change one gummy at a time. So,
well,
I love that.
And we've learned too that, I mean, our society is driven based on what we want to believe more than what the truth is. I think that's across the board.
If you say it enough and loud enough and enough times, people start to believe it.
Yeah.
So we've gone well over our time here today. So I'm going to let you all do, like, if you want to say one thing to your customers or people out there as far as getting in contact with you, feel free. I want to thank you all for coming on the Homegrown Hustle. I'm looking forward to seeing what you all do with your businesses, with the uncertain future of the cannabis industry here in Minnesota. So probably have you back on once some of that stuff settles out, if that's all right with you all. But we're gonna close it out. You want to start, Margi?
Sure.
Ladies first. I should have done that.
Well, thank you for having me, Matt. This has been awesome. And you can find Veek at Veek Wellness on Instagram and all the socials. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Spelling VIIQ. Is this? Oh
Shameless
man,
plug.
I can't.
Twist it.
I can't do the shameless plug effectively. All right, here's the camera. Veek. VIIQ Wellness on all the socials. And yeah, please connect with us. We're a brand new baby company and really hoping to connect with all kinds of awesome humans. So
thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
My pleasure.
It was really good to see you again. It's been too long. And Margi, thanks for facilitating. Matt, thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. And I think that we've probably got a lot of hanging out and chatting to do because we just met today.
Yeah.
But I have always kind of faded into the background and not really wanted to be the face of a company because, I don't know, it's a lot of pressure. So you can contact me at nate@cannasoda.com. That's cannabis before the ends and Minnesota after the ends. So CANNESOTA. And if you're interested in having somebody manufacture products for you, specifically gummies, I could be your guy. And if you want to carry our house brand products, we got those too. But also just want to promote Veek and other people like Margi who are finding their niche and really like using cannabis to affect change in communities that are often overlooked.
It's great.
Thanks, Nate.
Thanks again, Nate.
Let's see. Best way to reach me would be on Instagram, Raiden Labs USA, RAIDEN labsusa.com is our website. And yeah, check out our gummies. We got the 3 flavors here. We got a nighttime formulation that I haven't seen on the market yet so far in the States. So that'll be exciting. And yeah, we're in over 50 stores in the metro area. So look for the big R. And yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions or opportunities. Thanks everybody for your time.
Yeah, thank you all for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching, listening, whatever you're consuming this on. If you could give it a like or share it with a friend, it helps us continue to grow our audience and bring in guests like this to drop some knowledge on you all. So thanks again for joining us. Until next time, keep hustling.
Are you dealing with pest or wildlife issues on your property? Call us at 763-328-0156 or scan the QR code to learn more.
Thanks again for joining us on Homegrown Hustle. Our local business community thrives because of the brilliant leaders right here in our backyard. And it's been an absolute privilege to provide them with a platform to share their invaluable expertise. Stay tuned for more insight, wisdom, and inspiration from our local business champions. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Together, we'll continue to nurture and expand our homegrown success stories. Matt Eichmann signing off until our next insightful episode.